10 horrific cases of hell on Earth. Number 10. The Swamps of Ramree. World War II's Asian theatre saw a truly horrifying battle in the February of 1945, an adaptation of which could rival Steven Spielberg's Jaws. The Japanese soldiers garrisoned in the island fortress of Ramree in southern Burma were forced to retreat into the mangrove swamps after being overrun by a Royal Marine contingent. Had the 1,000 soldiers who entered the swamp known the hell they'd find themselves in, they would surely have surrendered to the British. The fleeing Japanese, many of whom were already wounded and low on ammunition, were set upon by the swamp's overwhelming population of saltwater crocodiles, averaging 15 feet in length. Their man-eating capabilities are well documented, and the glut of blood from the battle only catalyzed the feeding frenzy. British naturalist Bruce Wright, who was attached to the Marine Squadron, observed that of about 1,000 Japanese soldiers that entered the swamps of Ramree, only about 20 were found alive. Number 9. The Great Revolt of the Jews. The Great Revolt of the Jews in 66 CE against the Romans, who had for so long been their oppressors, saw the former masters come back to make an example of the protesters. For a long time, the anti-Roman sentiment held among Jews had been mounting, severely catalyzed by the radical actions of the crazed Roman Emperor Caligula. Even years after the death of Caligula, the dissent remained among the Jews. In 66 CE, after the Romans relieved the Jewish temple of vast quantities of silver, the oppressed Jews rioted, annihilating the small Roman garrison stationed in the city. Wanting to stifle this insurrection, Rome dispatched 60,000 heavily armed, hardened legionaries. The Romans laid siege to Jerusalem, finally overcoming the city's defences in 70 CE. The incensed Romans killed, raped and pillaged indiscriminately. To them, all Jews were to be considered a party to the original uprising. One shudders to think of the hell experienced by the Jews once the Roman siege was triumphant. Many of the city's inhabitants were crucified or sold into slavery. Though records vary, the Great Revolt is thought to have killed over 1 million Jews and led to the well-documented destruction of the sacred temple. Number 8. Colonization of the Aztec Empire. To be an Aztec in the 16th century was to truly experience hell on earth. Prior to the Spanish invasion of Central America, led by the unerring Hernan Cortes, the Aztec people had only been used to warring against their primitive rivals such as the Totonac and Tlaxcaltec peoples. Now they faced the Spanish invasion force, sporting guns which the Aztecs had never encountered or indeed imagined. It's not surprising that the Spanish overwhelmed the Aztec people. However, the violent methods they used against the whole populace, rather than just the fighting men, was what made the invasion truly hellish. The startling fact that there was a papal debate about whether the inhabitants of Central America were human explains this cruel treatment. Alongside the invasion, the Spanish invasion forces' introduction of smallpox killed countless more Aztecs, as, never having countered the disease before, they had developed no immunity. Number 7. Disaster on the K-19. The ordeal the crew of the Russian nuclear submarine K-19 endured can only be described as hell underwater. On July 4, 1961, while conducting exercises near the coast of southern Greenland, there was a major leak in the reactor coolant system which threatened to kill everyone on board. Making matters worse, the ill-fated submarine's long-range radio facility had malfunctioned, preventing them from making contact with Moscow. Thus, the crew found themselves several hundred meters below sea level, nuclear radiation slowly contaminating the entire ship, and no means of requesting help. Imagining a more devastatingly isolated scenario is a difficult task. Surrendering themselves to a nearby American warship was out of the question for Zatayev, the ship's captain. He feared that, by surrendering themselves to the Americans, they would uncover all the confidential documents on the submarine. To prevent a mutiny, he confiscated all of the ship's small arms, except for 5 pistols, distributed to his 5 most trusted officers. In a desperate bid to rescue the ship from full nuclear contamination, a team of 8 crew members were tasked with entering the highly contaminated section of the ship and wielding a new water supply pipe to the damaged coolant system. The temporary fix bought the crew enough time to be evacuated by a diesel submarine. All 8 members of the repair team died shortly after. In the ensuing years, 15 more of the crew would fall to radiation poisoning. Number 6. The Black Death. Peaking between 1358 and 1350, the Black Death is thought to have killed up to 200 million people in Europe, a staggering 60% of the total European populace. The summer of 1348 was particularly wet across Europe. Sodden grain lay rotting in fields, and there was widespread unrest at the impending food shortages. The issue was to be dwarfed, however, by the outbreak of bubonic plague across Europe. The epidemic spread like wildfire, particularly in cities where the overcrowding and terrible sanitary conditions only hastened the rate at which ill-fated city dwellers succumbed to the fatal illness. Someone infected would find bulbous, fist-sized boils, most commonly found around the groin, armpits, or neckline. These intensely painful swellings would at first be red before turning black, giving the epidemic its name. Once you developed these boils, you were expected to be dead as quickly as 2 days later. Such hell was just as harsh on the survivors. To witness the painful death of all your friends and family, seeing corpses rotting in the streets, and living in fear of contracting the disease yourself may have been a fate worse than succumbing to the plague. Number 5. The Battle of Stalingrad. Though those involved were to find themselves the victim of extreme cold, as opposed to the traditional heat of hell, there can be little debate that the experience of the German Sixth Army at the Battle of Stalingrad was utterly hellish. The Germans assaulted the city on the 23rd of August 1942 and found themselves embroiled in a dogfight with the Russians, which only ended with the Nazis finally surrendering on February 2nd, 1943. Between these dates, both warring factions endured the full force of the bitter Russian winter, though it is irrefutable that the unprepared, ill-supplied Germans truly went through hell on earth. A two-pronged pincer movement by the Red Army meant some 230,000 German troops found themselves trapped and surrounded in the city's centre. This site would become the frozen tomb for many. Not wanting to concede the strategically invaluable city, the German High Command forbade retreat. Instead, they attempted to supply the Sixth Army by air, though providing supplies to such a large number proved impossible. Lacking adequate supplies of food and winter clothing, the Germans who didn't perish by starvation were forced to endure hell. Accounts reveal that some of the men's fingers were so swollen from the cold that they were unable to enter the trigger guards of their rifles. Number 4. Great Chinese Famine. In 1949, some 10 years after the Communists took power in China, arguably one of the most catastrophic disasters of the 20th century befell the already impoverished Chinese populace. Even to this day, over half a century later, many of the Chinese people struggle to come to terms with their memories of the hellish famine, referring to it euphemistically as the 3 years of difficulties. The cause of the famine is widely believed to be as a result of the combined efforts of the radical agricultural changes implemented by Mao's Communist Party, a series of widespread droughts, and China's unfettered population growth. The largely agrarian nature of mid-20th century Chinese society makes estimating the total death toll a difficult task. Most scholars agree the figure to fall somewhere between 20 and 40 million. As well as the unimaginable death toll, the famine gave rise to a number of hellish stories. A small village of 45 inhabitants had 44 people perish from the lack of sustenance. The only survivor, an elderly woman, was plunged into madness due to the hell she was forced to endure. Another account tells of a starving teenage girl in an orphanage killing and eating her 4-year-old brother. Number 3. Transatlantic slave trade. Though the remnants of race hatred still remain in some pockets of society today, it is indisputed that humanity has come a long way since the despicable hell that was the transatlantic slave trade, where countless people were forcibly ripped from their home, driven to undergo the Middle Passage across the Atlantic, a voyage which often resulted in starvation for those unlucky enough to endure it, and forced to work for free in terrible conditions for a thankless master. We were reminded very bluntly of this hellish reality by Quentin Tarantino's painfully candid film, Django Unchained. Tarantino's vision of American slavery regrettably does not deviate far from the truth. Indeed, there have been many terrible accounts from the slave era which even rival Django in their hellish nature. Perhaps the worst of that is Margaret Garner, who, having briefly escaped her oppressors with her young child, decided to kill her child rather than seeing her sucked back into the hell that was slavery. Number 2. Ruandan Genocide. The violent struggle between the Tutsi and Hutu ethnic groups in Rwanda had taken place long before its catastrophic escalation in 1994 in the Rwandan Genocide. The Hutu, the group which the majority of Rwandan citizens belonged to, had seized power in 1962 from the Tutsi. Over the next 30 years, the racial tensions between the two groups would mount, finally spiraling out of control in 1994 when the assassination of Hutu President Juvenal Habyarimana led to the mass killing of Tutsis, as well as Tutsi sympathizers. Over the next 100 days, the Hutus would attempt a genocide of their age-old rivals, resulting in the death of nearly 1 million Tutsi. As if this relentless killing of their fellow Rwandans wasn't hellish enough, Hutu extremists added a despicable, sickening weapon to their arsenal. Having murdered the husbands of many Tutsi women, the Hutu would ensure that these women were not able to ever replenish the Tutsi numbers. There are numerous accounts of women being sexually mutilated with knives, machetes, boiling water, and acid, nullifying their childbearing capabilities. Equally as horrifying, the Hutu enlisted many HIV-infected males to rape the widowed Tutsi, often gloating as they're denying the women a quick, painless death. Number 1. the Holocaust. Considering that this was the darkest episode in human history, there was no way the Holocaust could have been anything but number one. To say the experience of the Jews, Poles, Gypsies and homosexuals, among others, in mainland Europe was hellish is to somehow understate the true horror of the Holocaust. No religious description or artistic imagining of hell adequately captures the terror of the systematic, industrialized attempt by the Nazis to eradicate the existence of Jews and other non-Aryan Germans in Europe. The statistic that 11 million people were murdered in the Holocaust doesn't begin to describe the terrifying logistics and machinery behind the Nazi killing machine. At first, the Nazis used the rather primitive method of filling a large building with captive prisoners and sealing all windows, before starting several fuel-burning engines around the site, slowly poisoning those inside with carbon monoxide. The Nazis would refine and develop this idea into their Zyklon B gas chambers, used in the extermination camps like Auschwitz, Belzec, and Chelmno. If they weren't put to death immediately, the prisoners were subjected to excruciating slave labor to fuel their enemies' floundering war effort. Though there are a plethora of horror stories from the Holocaust, perhaps the most disturbing are the accounts of Joseph Mengele, the Angel of Death. Mengele, a graduate of anthropology and medicine, conducted a number of human experiments on the captives of Auschwitz, including attempting to change eye color via various injections to the iris, amputations of limbs, and conjoining two people to become twins. Even Satan, on his best day, could not hope to match such atrocities. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to subscribe to our channel by clicking the subscribe button in the top right. Our channel has loads of other awesome videos just like this.